Well, thanks for agreeing to speak with me, Henk. I'm wondering if you could introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you currently do.
Yeah, thank you for having me. At the moment, I'm a full professor at Vrije University at the McLennan Chair for Baptistic and Evangelical Theologies, plural. My main interest is, however, not Baptist history, but early Christian history. I'm into early Christian texts. But I wrote a book on Baptist history, and I've taught the course several times a couple of years ago. And I'm very motivated to be part of the celebration coming here, also here in Amsterdam, because here we have the 20th Believers Church Conference at the beginning of July, and it's a joint effort of the Anabaptist, the Mennonite Seminary here in Amsterdam, and the Baptist Seminary and the European Baptist Seminary as well, the IBTSC, to host hundreds of guests here. And it will also be, of course, a specimen of how Anabaptists and Baptists can cooperate and work together for the kingdom of God.
That's a useful, practical example, isn't it?
It is. Yes, definitely. Yeah. We found one another, let's not be too close, but we found one another a couple of years ago. And we also have a joint series being published, the SBAMT, the Amsterdam Studies in Baptist and Mennonite Theologies. Okay. And as we speak, the third book will be issued probably this year or coming year. Yeah.
So people have been very busy researching and writing. Very good.
That's right. And we really cooperate in many occasions, of course, but also when and if possible, we also do some portions of courses together or have conferences together, as the coming conference in the beginning of July coming year. Yeah, here. So the VU will also be part of it, will also receive us, I think, in the main building, hopefully. Mm-hmm. And we also have, of course, a service, a church service, possibly in Amsterdam, on an old location there. And there will be trips around, I will share in the coming minutes, of course.
Yeah. So how did you first become aware of Anabaptists and get involved in Anabaptist research?
Yeah, well, I read the question on forehand, and I was wondering when it started. I think because I was raised a Protestant. Well, not really. We were not churchgoers, mm-hmm. But I remember the story of Münster, of course, and it raised much attention. It has always been that way in Holland, in particular when I was a pastor. People tend, in particular when I was pastor in Katwijk in the west of Holland, then Protestant believers would come and say, well, you're Baptist, aren't you? You're not affiliated, or are you with these radicals that went to Münster? Yeah. So, and this was how I was raised. Be aware of Anabaptists, and they may be called Baptist or Anabaptist, but doesn't mind, but be aware of those.
Yeah.
And so when I became a Christian, I was converted when I was 16, 17 years of age. I knew that I wanted to become a scholar and a preacher. And I became a Baptist because my wife was Baptist, and I became interested and I started studying it. We were invited in 1986 to do a term in Memphis at the Mid-American Baptist Theological Seminary. And there I was introduced to the course History of the Baptist by Professor Tom Nettles. Mm-hmm. Who wrote several books, and he introduced me to the Amsterdam history of the beginnings of the Baptists with John Smith or John Smythe, as some say, and Thomas Helwys. So it became, when we went back after a term, I had all these notes and I brought them together in this book. And this was really for me very important to get things sorted out about Baptists and Anabaptists. And I wrote books basically with these notes from Memphis under my arm. And so I could then tell the members of our church a story. So now and then we invited members on an evening, and I used all kinds of transparencies in those days to show pictures of early Baptists, books, etc., and we sang songs. So and I felt at home by then. I sort of had an idea, a grip of how it came about. These Anabaptists and also the Baptists. Of course, the Dutch Baptist story is quite a different story. It didn't start for us in Holland here with the beginnings of the 17th century. It was just a hop of English separatists in Amsterdam, and then they went back in the midst of the 19th century. In fact, the real history of the Baptists in Holland started, and it was a complete different story altogether.
Yeah. So is this the German influence coming through?
Yeah, it's German influence because the grounder of the Baptists in Holland, Johannes Elias Pfizer, had German rootage there, and he was a Protestant pastor. He was even did his doctoral studies, finished it in Groningen, as I did a couple of years ago, more than 10 years ago, 20 years ago already. And also in Groningen, but then he became a separatist. He was worked out of set out of his function as a pastor, and then he started. And then German Baptists knocked on his door and said, "Well, are you Johannes Elias Pfizer?" And they sat down, and then he first met Baptists. He was not aware of the existence of such people at all.
Oh, there you go. It's always a fascinating story, origins.
Yeah.
It can be fascinating. Yeah. So what is it that you particularly investigate when you're thinking about Anabaptists? Anything in particular that catches your imagination?
Yeah. My interest is not so much raised by doing historical studies. On the other hand, of course, I supervise master theses and also doctorate work here. We have several students doing work, investigations and explorations in Baptist history. But my main interest is the radical way of following Jesus as it started, for example, in Zurich, with these students of Zwingli, how they became disappointed in their master and had to separate themselves and really follow Christ in a radical way. So we used the book Kingdom Ethics of David Gushee. And this way of looking at the Sermon on the Mount, for example, has my interest. So I reserved a whole chapter on the Sermon on the Mount in my book. I hope it has been translated and possibly it will be published with, well, I cannot mention the name yet, but in North America.
Yes. Watch this space.
That's right. And my interest is mainly there because here, of course, my worlds come together. Early Christian text and thinking, in particular the Sermon on the Mount, and the way that these southern German Anabaptists and also the Swiss Baptists interpreted the Sermon on the Mount in a radical way. So if I look at Justin Martyr, for example, or Tertullian in the early church, and you read what Konrad Grebel, Zadler, and others said, Georg Blaurock, etc., then there's almost no space in between, although they have been separated for ages.
Yeah. And so historical theologian finds this fascinating, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I
So,
think I think also, Graham, that we need such radical thinking nowadays, in particular when so much is going on in Western Europe. Here in Amsterdam, yesterday even, with appraisals of students, and also the war in Eastern Europe, in our backyard.
yeah,
So we have to rethink as Christians anew what our identity is about, and how we want to live, which choices we make, and how we educate, in particular, young people to be hopefully non-violent, to be peacemakers, like the Sermon on the Mount says. And we are on top of this in our Baptist studies here in Amsterdam.
right, okay. So if you were saying to some Baptists around the world, why should we celebrate 500 years of this thing that happened in Zurich? What would you be saying to them?
Well, yeah, we should celebrate it, I think, because many things have changed ever since. So the first reason is that there is freedom of religion and freedom of conscience, hopefully, and we should cherish this and also commemorate together. The second reason is, I think, that we should try to understand each other's story and read one another's narrative and interpret it, like we do here with the Mennonites. We both study, like my predecessor did, Olaf de Vries, and now Mirjam van Veen, professor Anabaptist Studies and History for the Mennonite Seminary. And we cooperate as much as possible and try to understand one another's DNA, historical DNA, and how we can cooperate for the sake of the kingdom of God. And on the third place, I think it's also important to sort of find rehabilitation of these theologians, these martyrs, Balthasar Hoekmeijer and Michael Zadler, their wives, etc. And many things have been done already, also in the sense of rehabilitation. We visited Zurich a couple of years ago, and it has much attention there. But also here in Münster, the cages are still in the St. Lambertsturm there. Sometimes I go with students there. I visit Zurich and also the place. There are several facilities there at the moment, even the museum, Jan van Leiden Museum. And I think more of this rehabilitation and also vindication sometimes of theologies has to be done. So this is why I think we should commemorate together. And in particular, those who watch, I would invite to come in the first week of July next year to Amsterdam. Because then people can move and see also, make some trips, even maybe to the St. Lambertsturm in Münster, other places, the old bakery in Amsterdam, of Jan Munter. That's right. And then we can celebrate and try to understand our own position nowadays in much of the havoc that is going on.
So we're inviting people, of course, to come to Brisbane in 2025 as well. It's further for you folks to travel, but it's helpful for you guys from the north to travel to the south occasionally.
Yeah, of course. Yes, of course. Oh, yeah. And we will consider that definitely. It will be a year of much commemoration at the same time. There is something to celebrate in Amsterdam because it is also a celebration of many ages that Amsterdam is that Amsterdam started, the Amsterdam history, but also, for example, Nicaea, 325. So I'm also involved in these studies.
So you've got both.
Yeah. It's a year of celebration, and
well, it should be a very exciting year for all of us, I think. Building up to it, 2024 is getting pretty busy, and 2025 will be very busy.
It is very busy.
Yeah. So maybe just a couple of final questions about reading. So anybody who's new to the whole business of what are Anabaptists and what are they on about, what sort of introductory reading might you recommend for them?
Well, on an introductory level, of course, my book is being used here extensively in Holland, but this is in Dutch. But just to get in, to have some knowledge of the history, I could advise the book of Arnold Snyder, Anabaptist History and Theology Revised Student Edition. This is a student edition. It's very helpful.
Yeah.
Well known, I think. So this is one of the books we use. We also use for advanced students, for example, the book of Stuart Murray, A Biblical Interpretation in the Anabaptist edition. And it helps also focus on the way of interpreting, for example, the Sermon on the Mount and the ethics. And of course, it's just the basic level. On top of this, we would also advise to read the PhD dissertation of Teun van der Leer. This is one of the books issued in the SBAM series, looking into the other directions. And he finished it a couple of years ago, and it explores all the Believers' Church conferences of the 20th century, and tries to understand if there are threads running from this conference to conference, and where are we now if we think of our own position. What's the work to do, the homework for us now? What is our identity? What were these in the 60s, in the 70s, up to now? And then, of course, this 20th meeting is very important here in Amsterdam. Teun also digs up the history that the first conference would have been held in Amsterdam, but it was not successful. So now the 20th is in Amsterdam, and so we're ready to receive everyone. So we would advise students of advanced level to study this book. Another book of one of our PhD students, also to be issued in the series, is Diaspora as Mission. It takes stance in missional theology, coming from Baptist, but also from Anabaptist history. And then, of course, this book of Cogins is also very basic, but it is in particular on the sources, of course. John Smith Congregation. And I also profited much from the book, let me look it up, this one from Jason Lee, The Theology of John Smith. And he says Puritan, Separatist, Baptist, and Mennonite. And this is also what I concluded in my book, in particular the translation, because I reworked it and revised it, that I think John Smith is a person of multiple belonging, like Lee says. Basically, I think this is what the mindset of many Anabaptists and also Baptists was, that they were, of course, believers and expected the city from God. And as for here, they were people of multiple mindsets, like we say nowadays, people of multiple belonging. And that's what I like in Cogins' work, but in particular in Lee's work.
We're about to run out of time. Thank you for your time and everything that you're doing.